Hi everyone, how are you all? Let me know as you join. I'm going to have a conversation tonight with my friend Catherine Fyans. We often talk about, hi Marianne, hi everyone, let me know if you can hear me okay. So Catherine is a friend of mine. She's a medical practitioner, a holistic medical practitioner who is currently not practicing as a GP. So you might want her as your GP, but she is currently not working as a GP. But she's joining me just for us to have a chat, just about things that we would normally chat about if it was just the two of us, and also because she wasn't able to speak at the rally on Saturday in Melbourne. I just wanted to give her an opportunity to share what it was that she wanted to share, and just for us to have a chat about things in general. So I can see that you're here, Catherine. See if it gives you the option to join. Hi Haruka, hi everyone, lovely to have you here. Catherine, see if it lets you join the live. See if it lets you send an invitation, and then I can add you in. Okay, so Catherine, it's saying you're going to need the latest version. Remember I said to you, just update it before you come on. See if, so I've sent you the request. It's telling me you need the latest version to be able to join. See if you can send me a request. No, I'm not in the UK. Yeah, I know you're here, Catherine. I've just sent you an invitation and it said to me that you would need the latest version of Instagram. See if anywhere it gives you the option of sending a request to me to join. No, I'm not in the UK. I am in Melbourne with a ring light. Yes, I will be saving this. No worries, Haruka. Catherine, let me know in the comments whether you're able to send a request. Otherwise, I might need to talk Catherine through updating her app, and we will all be back in a moment. So, Catherine, when I send you a request, it says to me that you need the latest version and that I can't send you the request. So I'm just wondering if you are able to send me a request. You know, when you came in, hi, Kate, Naomi, Kate, Naomi. Still installing? Okay, beautiful. No worries. I will hold the fort while you are Naomi, Kate. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. So Catherine will be here in a minute. So basically, yes, Catherine is a medical practitioner, but tonight is not about medical advice. It's not about medical advice. It is about it's about two people just having a conversation who, yes, obviously she is still in the medical field, currently working. So obviously she's mindful of what she says. You assumed I was in the UK. So if you can't now send a request, Catherine, go back out, click on the top, just leave the conversation, then come back in, or actually, she sent you a request. Okay, good to go. I think you should be on any minute, Catherine. Hello. Yay, we did it. If you can't now send a request, Catherine, go back out, click on the top, just leave the conversation, then come back in, or actually, she sent you a request. Okay. I'm just going to see if that delay goes away. Hello. Yay, we did it. If you can't now send a request, Catherine, go back out, click on the top. Can you just go back out?
then come back in.
Can you hear that? If you just go click on the cross.
Yep.
Is that better? Has it gone? Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hi.
I'm sorry about all that.
No, that was me. That was definitely me, Sabina. So
No,
apologies,
it wasn't just
everyone.
you, because that
well,
delay and everything, that was
no,
the Wi-Fi gods.
It's my lack of skills in the tech, but we're here, so that's fantastic.
You are
Okay.
here, and I am happy to have you.
And it's a pleasure to be here.
So I was just sort of saying to everybody that's joined that we've known each other for a long time. We often have these conversations. We've just decided to let everybody in on the conversation because people are feeling alone. They're feeling isolated. They often feel like they're going a little bit crazy with the whole swirl of things. And so it's just helpful when people know, you know, there's a space, there's a community, and what you're feeling and thinking is normal. And also, I just said that you did not have an opportunity to speak at the rally on Saturday, and that I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about anything that you had wanted to talk about there.
Sure. Before we get started, Sabina, congratulations on getting your book published. That's fantastic. I look forward to reading it. I think, as you've explained, I'm certainly not giving medical advice. Look, I'm just expressing views as I see it. No one has a full truth on this situation. And I really recommend people do their own research as best they can and come to their own conclusions. And, you know, there's such a plethora of information out there, and a lot of it is conflicting. So really listening to that inner voice, and also common sense, because that seems to have gone out the window possibly a little bit during this time.
So you know what, Catherine? Obviously, I nursed for 19 years. And in that 19 years, any kind of pedestal I might have ever put a doctor on was certainly very sharply torn down. However,
apologies.
No, but you know what I mean. Like, we're in the industry, we know that it's filled with humans.
Yes.
But people outside the industry can have this kind of God-like sense of people that particularly, you know, it's very hierarchical. There's a structure. And that structure is also in the community where the doctor is going to be listened to more than the nurse, more than, you know, more than themselves often, which is, you know. And the reason why I say that I know how human they are is that a big thing that I'm noticing at the moment is that the minute it's a doctor speaking out, people will say, oh, see, but it's a doctor saying that. But how confusing for people when there are so many different voices, even in amongst the profession. And so one of the things we spoke about was censorship, because somebody said to me recently, you know, my husband is going to get the VX. Can you send me some info I can show him? And I said, sure, I can. But if you Google the names of these doctors who are saying anything or questioning the narrative, he's going to find most likely that they've been debunked in some way, or they're you know. So how you know, what would you even say to people about that?
Wow. Well, look, I think, you know, we're going through a massive dark night of the soul, you know, individually and collectively. And there's always there's some change, fundamental change that will always come out of that. And I think one of the changes is that people are doing their own research. Some people don't want to. That's absolutely fine. That's up to them. But the whole, you know, glitter of the word expert is kind of losing its sheen or glimmer, you might say. Now, I'm not saying there's not experts out there, but I've spoken to many lay people who have quite an in-depth understanding of the things that are being proposed, because they've spent the time. I might add, it does take considerable time, because as I said before, there's a lot of information and disinformation and industry information out there. And, you know, what's science anymore? There's so much confusion about real science, pseudoscience, industry science. And I think it's part of the inversion. I'm sure you know what I mean by that, that things aren't what they seem. So we've been subject to absolutely unparalleled censorship, okay? I mean, we all have. Really anyone who is offering some debate questions regarding the narrative is censored. So, you know, science always involved having a debate. And people might say, you know, some of the best advances in science came out of asking the right questions. But really, we've been officially told that we're not allowed. Simple as that. We have been in writing that from the regulatory bodies that we are not allowed to offer anything apart from following the narrative. And I'm taking a risk even saying this, but that is a fact. And I think it's fair that people know, because I think people need to be treated like discerning adults also, rather than children who are told what to do, essentially. And I think that's one of the changes that maybe should come out of this, in my opinion, is that ownership of one's health should be handed back to the individual. And no one group should own out healthcare. You know, and it's their collective hubris that says that they do. Now, we're right at the opposite extreme of what I'm suggesting, but change can come out of
you
extreme.
have to go that far, exactly. And the thing is that for most people, we're talking to the converted here on this channel. I would imagine anybody that's having a listen to this conversation, unless somebody's replaying it to somebody and they want to, you know, broaden the conversation. So
that's fine. Yeah.
But most people I'm finding are saying that I'm telling my family to do their research. I'm showing them things. They've told me they're not going to have the VX. And then they have a conversation with their GP and then they have it. I'm finding that particularly of a certain age group. I mean, I think particularly sort of 60 and over, there's still that kind of trust in the GP above all else. I think there's also a fear. I think there are some people who literally fear going against their doctor because whether it's some kind of, you know, authoritarian concept they've been brought up with, a generational thing, a cultural thing. And one of the things that concerns me really about this time is that where is the informed consent? That's the thing I'm asking.
Yeah.
Where is the informed consent? And as a nurse who used to work in research, I worked for the liver unit at Monash in research, and we signed people up to experimental drugs all the time. Knowing this is an experimental drug, knowing this is in its trial phases, and these people are literally participating in a drug trial. So one of the things I have most difficulty with is how are we just completely bypassing informed consent? You know, when we signed people up to drug trials, there was a criteria and you had to tell them all this information and you had to regularly, routinely check in and see how they were and, you know, all of that. So I would love people to even just ask their loved ones, do you know what informed consent is? I mean, I think that's a good starting point with a conversation that's not confronting. Well, if somebody said to me, I don't even know what informed consent is, what would be your definition of that from a perspective of what you've learned?
Well, really you want to look at the evidence-based pros and cons of any procedure. Ideally, the cure is not worse than the condition to be treated or prevented. And, you know, you're looking at a risk-benefit analysis. I mean, that is something that we've always been told that we have to do. That's changed. Over the last year, that has changed. So pretty much it's saying, no, follow the narrative and dare you question it or have a debate or raise some questions. You know, we're told that we will be punished, quote unquote, and subject to severe disciplinary action. Whatever that is, I forget. That's the regulatory bodies. Yeah, I won't name them, but that's official. That is official.
Yes.
So, you know, on one hand, we're told, I mean, as you know, having been in the healthcare industry, to diligently look at the pros and cons of whatever we're proposing for our patients. But that's gone out of the window. And it's very confusing because on one hand, these bodies are saying this is what we need to do. On the other hand, they're saying, yeah, but don't, just this is what you don't say anything against.
So it's almost like all the normal rules are out the window.
Pretty much, as far as I can see. No, I'm not.
I mean, it's almost like the medical practitioner that people might be having a conversation with, in a sense, themselves doesn't have informed consent of what they normally would have, the information that would normally be available to that person.
Yes. Yeah.
Is not there either.
No, and I think it comes back to what you were saying before, Sabina, is that people don't even know they have the right to ask for informed consent.
Yes.
And, that's been programmed into us for at least 100 years, and probably a lot longer back. So that's part of our collective consciousness, that this person in this profession knows more about me, about my body. And sure, they do in some areas. I'm not suggesting they don't. But it is assumed that all these people are doing their own research in the background and really are looking at things carefully. Well, I don't need to comment on that, but the reality is busy practitioners don't have a lot of time, you know. So I'm not saying that's an excuse, by the way. I'm just saying that's a reality. And I'm not speaking for anyone else. Maybe they do it diligently. I can't speak for anyone else. I just know when I've worked in that situation in the past, you've got someone with chest pain in one room and a baby screaming in another room and someone else in the other room, and 10-minute consultations, which I don't actually agree to. There's not a lot of time for a lengthy conversation. As I said, not an excuse, but it is a reality. And, a lot of us have spent considerable time reading through the papers and the research. And, so, looking at that rather than just industry sites is quite different.
I think too, this is something that many people wouldn't be aware of. It's certainly, and I'm just speaking about my own experience, it was something I wasn't aware of until I actually worked in research as a nurse within a research, sort of capacity, that it is all funded by the industry. So, to the extent that they paid, the drug companies that we were doing research for paid, because we were a unit that was a combined university and hospital unit. So the university provided some staff. One nurse was literally paid her whole wage was paid for, yearly wage was paid for by the pharmaceutical companies of the drugs we were trialing. And so I think, this is something people need to be aware of when we're saying, like, there's the science and there's the science. It's very difficult to separate out the vested interest of the people that are funding the science, that are paying for the people doing the research. Absolutely. And the question is, how much pure science is there now? I'm sure there's some. But, when there are such obvious vested interests, it seems to be completely overlooked, by the way. You have to wonder. And I think when you look at the history of some of these companies, you don't have to go too far below the surface to see that there's some issues there. Like the funding of the actual education that the doctors are having and the nurses are having before we go into our jobs. So was there any, what did you wanted to talk about on Saturday that you feel you'd like to share today?
Many things. Many things. Look, so ask me a question. I guess what I'm interested in is the psychology of coercion. generally
Yes.
speaking, and really the psychology behind all this. My
And
interest
I'm
is mind,
sure a
body,
lot of
medicine.
family
Yeah.
members that are currently seeing alarm bells, seeing red flags, and feeling like other people, because even you and I mean, this is the thing that I often ask is like, how is there medical people that are not seeing this right now? And not to, and when I say not seeing this, I'm not talking about at different levels. I'm saying just recognizing, I'm only speaking for myself, just recognizing that it doesn't add up, that the infection control doesn't add up, that where you can and can't, what you can and can't, you can stand up, you can't sit down, you can sit down, you can't stand up, none of that makes sense. And we have had a number of conversations where we've literally said to each other, are we the crazy ones? Because how
yes.
is it that other people that
I
are
know.
seeing this? And so this coercion, I'm glad you're going to talk about it, because it is something that I think will help people when they're entering conversations with family members, with loved ones, that they're trying to just get them to just have a more open perspective. So yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I hesitate to use the term mind control, but I have, so there we go. Because coercion is, it's a well-studied psychological tactic, and I think manipulating people's survival fears under the guise of healthcare, or goodism, as I call it, is a really heinous form of manipulation, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying everyone is doing that, not at all, but I've seen a bit of that. Now, we know that the mainstream media have been having a field day, okay? And they control perception, pretty much. Now, a lot of us don't look at the mainstream media, but a lot of people do, and they're getting most of their information through them. Yes. And, good journalism where there was a lot of debate and differences of opinion within the mainstream media, as far as I can tell, I don't turn on the TV much at all, so maybe it's happening and I'm not aware of it.
It's not
but
happening.
I'm not seeing a lot of it. It's not happening?
It's not happening.
So, for a lot of people, they're trusting that the information that's being fed from them and the authorities is for their best interests. And, these people only have their best interests at heart because it's delivered in such a way that, it's all nice, hand on heart, and, we're doing this and, we're doing this together, and all those platitudes, which turn my stomach, I might add, but anyway. People are trusting, and they're innocent, and they're gullible. That is our human nature, actually. We are innately trusting and gullible. And that is fine. We're innately good. And that is part of being a collective. It's part of the collective consciousness, but it can be taken advantage of and manipulated by unscrupulous individuals and institutions. So, mind control is a well-known, studied, methodology. There's no doubt. And as you're probably well aware, if people are hearing the message again and again and again, and it's putting their fear up here, as we noticed, particularly last year and this year, but maybe for different, well, we've had another burst, haven't we, in Melbourne, the fear, then what happens is if people are caught in that survival fear, they're going to default to the limbic part of the brain at the expense of the executive prefrontal cortex. So they don't think clearly. Now, this is not to blame anyone. That's just how the brain works. And it's a really good short-term ploy. If we're walking down the street and a car comes careering around the corner, we want that to work well to get us out of the way. But when that's going on day after week, after month, and now over a year, that is brainwashing. Now, people are offended by that term, but that is what it is. If we're getting the same message without a balanced debate about, well, let's look at the pros and cons. And on that note, things like the PCR test, why aren't we told, why is it not announced what cycles of amplification they're using? Why are we not given that information like
Do you think we're not given that information because people are actually, because there is this big part I'm going to say a big part, it's my optimism, but there it is, of the community that is now pretty clued up. And if they start giving us that information, then those of us who are actually having those conversations start to sound more valid.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And with all these sanctions imposed, like
Yep.
it would be lovely if the, authorities came out and said, well, this is why we've decided this. These are the pros and cons, and on balance, we've decided blah, 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 blah. We don't get that. We get snap your fingers, lockdown or whatever, just do it. And, we're being treated like children rather than experienced, discerning adults. And I really question that. Now, some people are fine with that and they want to be told what to do. They want the parent-like authorities to say, this is what we're doing. They don't have to make a decision. They just go along with it. And I think that's a fair proportion of people. So, and that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in, because if someone says, well, I don't know about this, let's I want to question some of this, that is, undermining their faith in the parent-like authorities who are keeping them safe, supposedly.
Yes.
And that's a complete misconception anyway, because no one really can. It's an inside job, as is health. So, there's a lot going on.
We've spoken about this before, where we've said, what is it that separates the person that can see this is happening and the person who can't? And I personally think a lot of it actually has to do with childhood. I almost think that people who either did have very loving parents and who really could have a very a genuine trust in the advice and the authority that they grew up under.
Yeah.
Or possibly people who were brought up under a lot of fear as well of do the right thing, listen to us. There's that as well. There would be the group that would really don't ever question. I mean, a lot of people are brought up not to question their parents ever. And you will find people in their 60s who are, smoking behind a parent's back.
Yes.
Because, I don't want them to find out I'm a smoker. So, I think those things lend themselves. So really what we are being given is an opportunity to grow the hell up.
Yes. Oh, 100%. 100%. And I totally agree with what we've lived through childhood. And I know what I've lived through that's influenced my reaction and my triggers, I might add. And, we all have to examine that, because we don't, if it's unconscious, then we're controlled by it. When we realise, I'm being triggered by this, okay, it's because of blah, blah, I have to heal that. Lesson learned, hopefully, and move on. But that doesn't happen if it stays in the unconscious realms. And what stays in the unconscious, as you know, is what controls us, behaviourally and health-wise as well. So, yes, I think our childhood has a big influence. And there'll be projections there as well, of course. But I think it's also generational. I think it's ancestral as well. Because pending, the experience, and particularly the traumas that maybe the ancestry lived through, we still, we inherit that in our genes, but also again in our, the broader aspect of our consciousness, our ancestral consciousness. Well, now that's not a medical term, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. But this is another thing that I find really interesting, because on that topic, from the word, I mean, I saw when they tried to do this previously with the things that came out, I saw them try and do it. I saw them try and ramp it up. But at the time, the media was not yet quite as on board as they are now. And the media kind of basically was at that point in time more of a voice of reason of, well, come on, it's not that bad. The last time they tried to do all of this, which I think would have been SARS, wouldn't it?
Yeah, SARS, and I mean, it goes back, it's also, way back into the 70s.
Just the last one. I think the last one was SARS. And you
and that's exactly.
And so
but a bit,
sorry.
Oh, well, it bit the dust, but also going back to the 70s, the swine flu. They were trying to do that, at least in America, mass vaccinate people. But they actually pulled the devices, when there were 25 deaths and 500 cases of paralysis Guillain-Barré, 25.
Yeah.
Compare that to now. Anyway, so it's intriguing how things
though,
change.
all of that is still able to be accessed. People can look that up. I mean, you know, these videos are doing the rounds from last time. But we've been able to see each time them try and ramp it up a little bit more, try and control the narrative a little bit more, you know, get the fear going, and really inflate the whole thing.
Yeah.
But interestingly, so for me, I just recognized it. The first thing that seemed off to me was the whole infection control thing. I came home from the supermarket and I was like, okay, so even though I'm touching everything, and you know, because as a nurse, you're thinking about your clothes, your shoes, your purse, your everything. But then also immediately the whole control and the lockdown and the terminology and the narrative and the frontline workers as though we're at war. You know, when I worked in emergency for a long time, I was not a frontline worker. Now suddenly you are.
No, nor was I.
Exactly. Yep. You as a GP now, you're a frontline worker. So I immediately thought, I recognise this, right? And being Austrian, I think every part of my DNA went ping, like we know this. And yet, speaking to relatives in Austria, I will often talk about that and they look at me quite blankly. And I'm talking to people that were alive during the war.
Yeah, interesting.
Isn't it?
Look, it's fascinating, Sabina. It's something I've thought about a lot, and I don't have the answer why some people see it this way so clearly and some people see it this way so clearly.
Yeah.
And I must say, you know, with myself from pretty much day one, it was like, this doesn't fit. Yes. You know, this is my ordinary medical brain.
It's a feeling.
It's a knowing, actually. Yeah, it's a feeling.
You're right. It's
but, knowing. You know, just using my plain old ordinary common sense medical mind, it's like, I've never seen these act like it's not fit. It's just not fitting, you know. And getting back to the, you know, the coercion, I'm completely sidestepping what I was saying, but bring me back. But getting back to that, we see that this whole thing, the whole rollout is like an election campaign. It's rolling out like an election campaign with cheap bribes, you know, the donuts, the cash, the beer, whatever. I've never, ever seen anything like that before. And there's almost a cult fervour sort of energy around it, you know, the pictures on social media, the little badges, the FOMO. It's like, in 40 years of medicine, I have never seen a phenomenon like that. So something fundamentally has changed very, very significantly. And it's like, you know, a good idea doesn't have to be forced, for one thing. But people are caught up in that fervour, that group energy, that kind of, you know, herd mind that we're all subject to.
Do you know what I saw?
Yeah.
Recently, I saw somebody write about that, and it just, the truth of that, the truth of what I read just hit like a ton of bricks. And they said that it is giving a sense of purpose to people who have felt without purpose for a long time. And if I look at the kind of nurse who really buys this hook, line and sinker, the kind that will volunteer for the testing station and the, you know, volunteer for it, put their hand up. It is the person who wants to be a good girl. I'm just going to use girl. It'll be good boy as well. But I'm just going to talk about women because they're the ones I have in my mind. The kind who will wear the 14 masks if she has to. And even though you know that a year ago you could have sat with her and said, we never wore masks. We never wore masks. Of course I wore masks at work as part of my job when I went into the room of somebody that had an infectious disease that spread through, you know, droplets.
Sure.
Yes, I wore a mask. Or I wore a mask to protect the person who had a lowered immunity and it warranted me wearing a mask. never, when we took them out of their room,
Yes.
they were the ones that wore the mask, not the whole entire hospital. We didn't
No.
all put a mask on, so the person who had a lowered immunity, you know, we didn't mask the people with no symptoms. We masked the person who was unwell. And that made complete sense to us at the time. And yet now the whole scenarios, now everybody has to be masked in order for one person to be able to, you know, and yet the people who knew that made sense back then are now acting as though it makes sense now for everybody to be masked.
And the evidence is overwhelming. You know, the lack of efficacy and the potential harm of these things, particularly in children, I might add. So I've got piles of papers on these things. But somehow most of the world's population has been convinced that wearing a dirty piece of material in front of your source of air and prana, I might add, is somehow protective of their and other people's health. So that, you know,
but
most people on the
nurses,
planet.
even medical people.
Yes, no. Yeah.
Even medical people.
Well, exactly. That's extraordinary. And that's where really the frontal lobes are bypassed, because there is a lot of evidence and it's accessible to anyone. And, you know, we have an almost yearly pandemic that kills hundreds of thousands of people every year due to a mutating virus for which there is a wide uptake of you know, those things, in the body. And it's called influenza, and hardly anyone batted an eyelid. And we know that the mortality from this one is comparable or less, depending the age group,
or slightly less,
of ordinary influenza. Why the disproportionate response to one rather than the other? And we've got this, we've universally become germ phobic, and that has been applauded and encouraged. And we know we need to, you know, live in a sea of microbes of all sorts, and we always do. We have trillions in and on our body and in our environment. They're not going to eradicate them all. We absolutely need them for health. And that's one of my concerns with the masks and the lockdowns and all that, is that we're not exercising our immune systems as we normally would, likely we would exercise a muscle. So the message is we don't have an immune system, and the mask to me is symbolic of saying we are unwell, we are vulnerable, and we are powerless, and we are silent, and we are obedient. And that's my main concern about it, apart from the health risks, and I can go into detail about that, but I won't, is the symbology. And it concerns me particularly regarding children seeing this, because it's saying we're vulnerable, we're weak. Now, sure, if it was a week or something, even then I wouldn't support it. But this is going on now for over a year. Yeah. And, you know, the flip-flopping, mask on, mask off, mask on, mask off.
I mean,
with no end in sight, because there'll always be another variant, and apparently there's about 40,000. You know, this is what viruses do. They mutate. Usually they...
interesting point that somebody made to me today, because, of course, people are having the flu jab as they would any other year. But apparently last year nobody had the flu. Right?
No.
Nobody had the flu last year. And because normally they take the strain from the year before to make the VX.
From the opposite, from the Northern Hemisphere.
The person that I was talking to, she said a few of her family members have had the flu, you know, VX. And she said to them, but what did they use to make it? When nobody had the flu last year. And I thought that was quite an interesting point to make.
Yeah, a small detail. A lot of those small details, we just kind of wipe them off the side.
Little things.
Don't ask questions. Interesting, isn't it? Look, I had the flu quite badly, actually, 2 years ago, 2019. And, you know, I'll get something like that if I have particularly, you know, it was a perfect storm, and I had I'm vulnerable to these things if I have a certain emotional stress on top of a few other things, okay? And I know what it is. And it's when I haven't heeded the cues from what's going on in my life. Yeah. So my body says, look, I'm sorry, you're having this, you're taking time out. And I was actually hospitalised with pneumonia, and the hospital was overflowing, absolutely overflowing. I had to stay in A&E all night. Was the
Yes.
mainstream media screaming about that? Why the disproportion with this one? Because when you look at the stats around the world, a lot of the mortality rate has not gone up in many, if not most countries. And the age of death from this, I'm not saying people haven't suffered or haven't, and I'm not saying we should be blasé about that, not at all. I'm just trying to get some perspective here. And I'm looking at the disproportionality of the response compared to other things. So when you really look at the stats, it's not measuring up. But we're still, having this panic alarm, the mainstream media, full on. And when is it going to end?
The stats are also not adding up with hospital admissions because, as you say, hospitals are full to the brim worldwide. Hospital systems are crumbling, falling apart, bursting at the seams as governments don't basically put enough money into the system. There is not enough staff, there is not enough beds. And every year, winter is particularly horrendous in every hospital, I would imagine, around the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yes, why is this suddenly, and yet we know last year the admissions were down. Down. Why? Because people were too frightened to go to hospital when they were sick, and many, I think if we looked at the proper figures, most likely became more ill than they would have if they had been treated on time, and possibly many might have died that would not have if they had sought treatment for whatever conditions they had. And the other thing is people just weren't taken to hospital because people were literally turned away.
Yes, and elective surgery would have been put off for a whole lot of factors like that. So it's intriguing. It's quite intriguing.
Now those numbers are out there. People can find those numbers. They actually spoke about it. One of the politicians mentioned it. I don't know who. It would have been one of the health guys. Said, well, the numbers were down last year, and they literally showed that hospitalisation numbers were down. Now, how can somebody hear that and still think that there was a pandemic? Because pandemics don't basically hold off for you to not have to go to hospital because it's inconvenient right now. I mean,
exactly.
And by pandemic, of course, we're not saying number of people unwell. We're saying the severity of the duration, the severity, the need for intervention, I would have thought is what makes a pandemic as opposed to not a pandemic.
Yeah, well, the WHO changed the definition of pandemic in 2009.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that, well, I believe, I don't know the exact wording, but they reduced the severity of symptoms. So it was more related to the how widespread it was rather than the severity and number of deaths. So it was changed, the definition, in 2009. And, you might wonder why, but so they can declare a pandemic, not so much based on the severity of the infection, but how widespread it was.
The numbers.
Interestingly, the WHO also very quietly changed the definition of herd immunity last year to be vaccine-related or VX-related. So, in one foul swoop, they wiped out billions of years of natural biological history by saying, well, we don't actually have immune systems anymore, therefore you are dependent on an intervention. And really,
so I'm really glad you brought that up, because when I was learning about immunity and herd immunity, my understanding of that and how I was taught that was that basically when enough people have been exposed to a disease, they develop an immunity, and therefore that disease really can't sort of have an outbreak to the severity that it might have if there was less people with that amount of immunity.
Yeah. So basically it's, most of the young... But you had
to have the disease to get the immunity.
Yes, to different degrees.
Yes.
Well, you have to
Yes.
have the virus. So it's reliant on, it's reliant on maybe the younger, healthier people with the more robust innate immune systems that really push up the herd immunity. And when it gets to a certain level, then pretty much the population is protected. But that concept that I grew up with, and it makes perfect sense to me because we've been on the planet for millennia and we've somehow survived, has been dismissed. And my concern about that is it's really insinuating into our consciousness that we can't rely on our own immune systems and we have to be reliant on the artificial, something produced in a laboratory put into our bodies for us to survive. And this is what most,
when I was learning about it, the thing that you receive in your arm could not actually give you immunity.
Well, yes, there's different levels of immunity depending whether it's natural or whether it's artificial. And I'm no expert in that area, and I'm not going to pretend to be.
This is just,
but you know, it's really the way I see it. What has been, you know, brought home to me, it's the natural versus the artificial. Okay. Yeah. So we know there are great things in medicine, and life-saving, and, you know, if I had acute appendicitis, I'll know where I'll be going.
Yeah.
But the pendulum has swung so much that, you know, the natural world pretty much has been denigrated and invalidated. It's like, no, sorry, for you to survive, you rely on these. And this is actually what most people believe, at least unconsciously, and this is where the whole anti-vaxxer terminology comes in. I don't know if I should be mentioning, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that terminology, but, you know.
Just say the anti.
Oh, the anti, you know, that term.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a term that it's a very emotive and almost hysterical term designed to denigrate anyone who wants a debate or doesn't completely follow the narrative that has been programmed into us, okay?
Yeah.
And it's usually delivered in not pleasant ways.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, are you pro or anti-penicillin? Well, it depends. It depends on the type of penicillin. It depends on the person, the condition, the age and comorbidities and a whole host of factors. So do you say you're pro or anti-penicillin? It depends. But you can't have a middle ground with this. It's either you're pro or you're anti.
Yes.
Now, it's not a religion. It's not like you have to be 100% for or against. Yes. But if anyone says, look, I just need to question these thing that's been offered to, you know, most of the world's population or the world's population for a disease that has 99.98. I don't know the exact figure, percentage recovery rate. I think it's fair to actually say, let's have a good deep dive and look into this. Yeah. But people are so threatened by people, you know, within and without the profession, I might add, who want a debate, and that terminology, and particularly, you know, the rabid mainstream media, they love throwing it around. That person's an anti blah, blah, blah.
Because it immediately shuts down the conversation.
It shuts down the conversation, absolutely, and it's gaslighting, particularly when it's used by some people. Some people are just scared. And, you know, and I'm thinking, why does that term have so much potency? Why can't we question it?
On purpose, it's been, you know, when you were saying before about the mind control, the manipulation, I'm just going to say, I think that's been purposefully planted into people to be, to shut down any conversation and to basically shut their own minds off. I think when somebody buys into that term, they're shutting their own mind off, and it almost actually ensures that they don't learn about, because, you know, people around at the moment may not be aware that doctors and nurses did not always behave and speak the way that they do now about the VXs. So when I was training, would have been around sort of 91, 92, the whole flu, you know, shot thing was kind of being spoken about in the tea room. And one of our students mentioned to one of the doctors, you know, is this like, what is it? Should we get it kind of thing? And he said, no. It's for the older population who are vulnerable. You should not be getting it. You are young. You should get ill when you need to get ill and build a natural
Mhm.
immunity. This was a
Well,
doctor.
precisely. Yeah.
And that was the normal conversation you had back then. That was the norm, that nobody in that room was
Exactly.
calling anybody else a name. Nobody else was
No,
calling the
no.
association and saying they should have their registration removed. You know, nobody
Oh
was
yeah, I
doing
mean
that.
it's quite bizarre because we're overtaken by the group think. People don't see it. Again, limbic center, not the prefrontal cortex.
But to
But
go
that
from there to
terminology,
today, that happened in a
yeah,
fairly short period of time.
it did. Yeah.
And you had,
Well, there's a reason. Hmm. Yes, and that terminology, the anti blah blah blah, people are in terror of that, particularly in
yeah,
the medical profession. So, oh, I'm not an anti. You know, you hear people who are wanting a debate, but they jump in quickly and say, oh, I'm not an anti so and so with great fear. Now the reason is that terminology holds a heretic energy,
yeah,
because basically what subconsciously people are saying if you're an anti-blah is that you're actually, you're a murderer, essentially, is what they're saying. Yeah, and
yes,
a lot of people think, well, that person who's anti or questioning this is between me and death, which is an utter misconception.
yes,
And that heretic energy is still in our collective consciousness, and we know that throughout history. Heretics were not treated too well, okay? So there's a subconscious enormous fear, and I
yeah,
carry it too. I've just had to examine it. It's like, oh God, I don't want to be called that if I have this conversation.
yeah,
It's because it holds that energy, and, you know, we're basically in fear of being punished in very unpleasant ways. Well, we've already threatened we will be, but that's where the energy comes from. So it's a
yeah,
very, very, very manipulative, clever tactic. It's the same with
yes,
the terminology conspiracy theories, which was introduced in the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. It
yeah,
started, I think, by the CIA. Anyone who queried what was going on was given that label, and it stayed until this time. And I
yeah,
find both the labels quite offensive,
yeah,
highly emotive, hysterical, and really designed to shut people down. And I just think we need to put it on the table. We're adults now,
yeah,
and examine it. And it's like and some people are so vehemently against anti-blow. Most people aren't anti, by the way. They just want to debate.
yeah, yeah,
But it's like the junkyard dog, you know, that snarls and bares its teeth at the intruder. Underneath that is great fear,
yes,
under that aggression. So those people are
yeah,
saying, you know, I mean, some people are deliberately gaslighting. I'm sure the mainstream media is, but some people are generally really scared because
yes,
they've been taught that our only saviour, the only way we're going to survive is if we have the lab-produced artificial put into our bodies. And on that note, people look more at the specs of a blender that they might be purchasing, or the ingredients of a cupcake they might be eating, than
it's very true.
what they're willing to actually put into theirs and their children's body. And
That's very true.
I do want to mention something about the whole childhood proposed rollout. Maybe I shouldn't. Do you want me to go there or
Well,
not?
I'm conscious of the fact that we're nearly at the hour,
Probably good I
and
don't.
I want to keep it to the hour only because sometimes when you go over, Instagram doesn't save it, and a lot of people had already said to me today, "Will you
No.
be saving this?" So I want to do that.
Yeah.
But you know what? So I mean, we've got a good 5 minutes. I'm more than happy for you to talk about anything you want to. The other thing we can definitely do is have another one of these again at whatever time you would like, because I think people benefit from these conversations if you're open to it. So bear
I
in
would be
mind,
very open
anything
to
you
it.
want to
Thank
talk
you.
about, you don't have to shorten it into 5 minutes. If it's a longer conversation that you want to put into context, we can definitely do that again at another time.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say, you know, one thing. You know, a million voices might say one thing. If your inner voice says something else, who are you going to listen to? You listen to your inner voice.
Yeah.
And I think throughout history, if millions are going that way, that's not always the best way to go.
Yeah.
That would be, you know, I know your audience knows that, but I think we need to be reminded that, you know, we do have a lot of innate knowing, and we've shut that down, and
Yeah.
we've listened to the authoritative, louder voice that overrides us. And we are the ownership of ourselves, and no one should own anyone else's body, health, or life, in my opinion. So, Yeah.
I would love to finish off with saying that I love that you brought up that you also carry that fear about, you know, what will happen with me speaking up and speaking out, because often people look at
Yeah.
someone like you and they
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could
Mm-hmm.
speak up about that. And I think that it's important for them to know that often
Yeah.
someone like you maybe thinks, well, I wish I didn't have to. So it's not that you maybe have a burning desire to speak about this, and it's not that there is no fear involved. It's that there's a lot of courage involved. Just kudos to all the people right now speaking up, who do get up at these rallies and marches and who really genuinely always volunteer their time and are putting, you know, all sorts of things on the line for, you know, what could be the fallout from any of the conversations that you have. So I just want to say a very big thank you. We really appreciate that you are speaking, you know, out, up, whatever, that you're sharing things that you want genuinely people to have a look at, have a research about, look more widely themselves, and trust their gut. If there's a flag, look into it.
Exactly. And thank you for saying that. And really, it's a hard choice, but it's a no choice.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, cannot not do it. And as I said, I'm just sharing the way I've seen it. No one has the ultimate answer. And people have to make their own conclusions.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna leave it there. And yes, would love to have this again at some point in time if you have the time. I'm sure.
I'd like to. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Catherine.
It's been fun. Thank you so much. Good. Bye bye.
All right. You can just press the little cross.
Yeah, I'm so good at
that. There's a little cross at the top. If you put, beautiful. Okay. So thank you so much, Catherine. I will finish this now because we're about at the hour, and I will save it. I know we didn't get to your questions, but you know what? I just wanted to stay in the flow of the conversation. The comments, unfortunately, I'm not going to save, so I haven't seen them. I don't know what you've been commenting. If there's something you particularly want to say, please put it on the replay, and then I can read it, I can see it, I can pass it on to Catherine for you. And I would love to have her on again and have more of a conversation. So anything that you would like covered there, also let me know. All right, thank you everybody for joining. Have a great evening. Much love.